in this little video, we're going to go very briefly over the importance of system gaps and what a system gap is and why they might be surprising. You might be surprised to find a system gap in your system of phonological sounds, right? So in your language's sound system, what constitutes a gap? So in this first one here, we have a series of stops. Let's say in your language you have P, aspirated P, and B, T, aspirated T, and D, K, aspirated K, and G. That's your stop series. That's what that's called, is a stop series. In order to distinguish these sounds, a kid who's learning to distinguish these sounds is going to have to learn that you have an unaspirated, an aspirated, and a voiced version for each one of these stops, right? So we have unaspirated, aspirated, and voiced. We have unaspirated, aspirated, and voiced. Once you know that you have these three distinctions, then the only thing that you also have to learn to get this series and this series as well, right? So to get the P ones, to get the T ones, and to get the K ones, is we already know we have this distinction between unaspirated, aspirated, and voiced. So all we need to add to our knowledge of our sound system is to know that we have bilabial version and we have alveolar version. And you use those same levels for each of those, right? And so you're only memorizing this and then bilabial, alveolar, and velar, right? And you just duplicate that in each of those different positions. Now, what constitutes a system gap is where, for one reason or another, in one of these series, you're not going to use all these levels, right? So you don't use all three levels in one of these locations, right? So let's say you have an aspiration contrast here, but not for alveolar, right? There's no aspiration contrast there, right? So that's going to make you as a linguist go, that's surprising, because you've already bothered learning all of this stuff, so why wouldn't we use that there? And so this gap here where we don't have a TH is called a system gap. Now there are other kinds of system gaps you can get as well, right? So let's look at this sound system down here. We have velar, or we have bilabials. We have alveolars, and we have velars. Now for each of these, we have something that is a stop version and we have a fricative version. And in each box, we have a voiceless and a voiced, right? So if we think of this as a grid, right? It's sort of three-dimensional, right? But in the sound system as it now stands, we have something in each one of those little boxes, right, that has been made available by the fact that we've established these variables, right? To have a system gap is any time you delete something from one of those boxes but leave it so that you still need that understanding. So let's take out this S. Right? That's a system gap because we know perfectly well from the things we already need to describe this system that we could have a voiceless alveolar fricative. But because it's not there, we call this a system gap, right? So there's our gap, right? Gaps are important because they're surprising, mostly. Most systems have very few gaps, and there are some gaps that are very rarely present, right? So when you're describing a language's sound system and you notice that there's a gap like no like we have a bilabial voiceless fricative and a velar voiceless fricative, but no alveolar voiceless fricative. It's worthy of note.